Thank you and welcome. It's my pleasure to be opening for tonight's show that honors that really honors our transgender community. I'd like to open tonight's show with a few pieces of my original spoken word. And where should I really begin? I should begin right at the very beginning. This is titled Fig Leaf. Let us go back to the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve, the original ones to deceive. Oh, who could believe? Gender is only what's behind a fig leaf. Was it just Adam's rib that led to this fig leaf fib? Or was it up to Eve, with the birth of humanity, to conceive? Were we really born so naive? Oh, who could believe? Gender is only what's behind a fig leaf. Perhaps that slithering snake held more than that apple up its sleeve. And how far does an apple fall from a tree to know gender is not all that we can see? Oh, who could believe? Gender is only what's behind a fig leaf. And who would believe gender is only defined by a fig leaf? Thank you. I'd also like to share with you one of my latest creations. This is based on the melody of Doe Deer. Doe, a deer, an assumed female deer. Ray, a given name to her firstborn son. Be a name I call myself. Far, a long way, my dream's just begun. So, my gender is co-ed. Law, our therapist note to follow through. T, transgender is how one read. That brings us forward to go, 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 go. And I will leave you tonight with a little nursery rhyme. There was an old woman who lived in a shoe. She had so many children. She didn't know what to do, for she had forgotten who was pink and who was blue. I know what I can do, said that old woman who lived in a shoe. So without further ado, she raised up that shoe and she called each child aside. She said, I will let you decide who is pink and who is blue. It's all up to you, said that old woman from her shoe. And thank you very much, and please enjoy it.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. It's June 10th, and I'm Stephen Pennell. I'm speaking with...
Once you kind of just say, you know, these people don't identify me, I do, then that, I think, that's really the turning point.
It's May 5th, and I'm Stephen Pennell, and I'm speaking with...
Thinking back as far as I can, I've always had a pretty strong gender identity, but people didn't think that I was the way that they thought I was. When the doctors said that I was female, they presumed, oh, she must be female.
So it's May 11th, and I'm Stephen Pennell, and I'm speaking with...
I was born the 29th of July, 1968, into a world that did not know the meaning of what T meant in LGBT, much less the LGB.
Today is the 28th of July, and I'm Stephen Pennell, and I'm speaking with...
But I do remember there was a couple of times, putting on my mom's heels and a dress or two, I kind of felt good. But what the hell did I know? I was a kid, I thought every boy did that.
My name is Stephen Pennell, and it's May 7th, and I'm speaking with...
It's a long, complicated story. Just lots and lots of years of just repression and repression.
It's June 11th, and I'm Stephen Pennell, and I'm speaking with...
I think historically for trans women, this is one of the core issues of our being. That male adherence to masculinity tends to be enforced more stringently and more violently than female adherence to femininity.
My name is Stephen Pennell, and it's June 10th, and I'm speaking with...
Ari.
And it's May 5th.
Cameron,
So it's May 11th.
Tiffany.
It's the 28th of July.
Josie.
It's May 7th.
Eli.
It's June 11th.
Kara.
Thank you for meeting with me. I really appreciate your taking the time. As I mentioned on the phone, we're gathering oral histories from transgender people here in Rhode Island. These interviews will be utilized for an archive, and some of the stories will be used in a public performance at the Providence campus of URI. It's our intention to honor and celebrate the lives of the trans people who are portrayed. It's also an opportunity to help educate the larger cisgender community to the experiences and challenges faced by the members of the transgender community. You can choose to be completely anonymous or use a pseudonym, or you can choose to use your own name. It's up to you. Okay, so to begin, would you share your story and your experiences in terms of your gender identity?
I was born the 29th of July, 1968, in a world that did not know what the T meant in LGBT, much less the LGB. So, I would say by 1971, I was dressing in my great-grandmother's doll clothes. She had some old Barbie clothes, you know, for the large-sized dolls. And I knew there was something wrong with that, so I hid it. I built little forts like little boys do, and then I hid in the fort and dressed.
I was maybe 5 or 6 years old, shopping for school clothes for the first time. And I picked out this great coordinated Garanimals outfit. Well, they were animal-themed outfits, and you know, if you had the giraffe top, then the giraffe bottom would match it. Well, anyway, I was with my mom, and we were probably at Rhode Island Mall, although it used to be called Midland Mall, and I picked up this great coordinated Garanimals outfit. It was a mini dress with leggings, and it was gorgeous. And you know, my mother just looked at me and kind of laughed because ostensibly, for all the world, I was a little boy.
One of my first ever memories is when I was about 7 years old, and my sister is walking downstairs, and she catches me with a backwards hat on and no shirt, singing to the Backstreet Boys. And so ever since then, I was her little brother. I was like, oh yeah, you know, that's cool. You know, she would try to ridicule me, but I was just like, yeah, I am your little brother.
I guess some can say that they can remember way, way back. I have a few vague memories. Probably one of my first memories is how, you know, boys do this and girls do that. And it was based upon, I was upset because I couldn't wear a one-piece bathing suit like my girl neighbor could.
Okay. Well, I usually always use the disclaimer that my story is just mine. It's not representational of every trans person. And my story is actually a little unusual. I don't really have a whole lot of formal memories before the age of 13. You know, trans folk will say, oh, I remember when I was 3 or 5. There's none of that for me.
So this clothing choice for school shopping kind of started this avalanche. My family was extremely typical Cranston Italian American, so my family thought it was funny for a little bit, a very short period of time, that their 5-year-old son was insisting that he was a girl. It stopped being funny relatively very quickly, and I kind of spent most of my childhood getting punished for one feminine expression or another.
I can remember always feeling very male. I was always called a tomboy because I liked to wear men's clothing, and everyone just figured it was a phase. And I remember my mom said, maybe she's gay. that's it. But you can't really explain gender identity when you're 5 or 6 years old, but you can feel it, you know?
Uh-huh.
Around the time I was putting on my mom's heels and a dress or two, I kind of felt good. But what the hell did I know? I was a kid, I thought every boy did that. Well, we moved from Newark, New Jersey to a small town called Kenilworth, which is Suburbiaville, a little over a square mile in New Jersey. And within the first year, I was raped from a neighbor. I never said nothing, and the reason was because I was wearing girls' panties, and because I was ashamed. I thought I did something wrong. I thought it was my fault, and then I got raped, and maybe if I didn't have the panties on, who knows? It's a devil, like a demon I still battle with. And any feelings I did have about being different in that way, don't put him in the closet, no. Put him in the grave and bury him. And for many years it stood that way.
If I would open my mouth and not speak in a masculine enough way, well, my dad would respond with increasing violence. I think that historically, at least for trans women, that this is one of the core issues of our being. That adherence to masculinity tends to be enforced more stringently and more violently than adherence to femininity. And so the classic thing is that tomboys are typically treated a little bit less harshly and a little bit more humanely than feminine boys.
So I remember I was on the football team, and I was a pretty kick-ass linebacker. And I was on the baseball team, and I was just one of the guys, because that's what I really was. I remember kind of trying to be like, yeah, I'm a boy. I'm a boy. I remember saying that I wanted to pee like my brother standing up.
To be honest with you, I went through most of my life never thinking really anything about my gender.
Obviously, gender it's not who you are. It doesn't define you, but it's definitely a big part of who you are. And when your gender doesn't match your sex, it becomes a bigger part of who you are, and you end up fighting a battle.
Until I graduated from grad school and started having relationships with women. And that dynamic kind of ultimately made me understand, oh yeah, I'm not a woman that loves women. I'm actually a man that loves women.
So for several years, I would dress in my great-grandmother's doll clothes until I got too big for those clothes. And then I would play dress-up with a female cousin of mine close to the same age. I continued to dress throughout junior high school. My mom remarried, so I had two stepsisters, and both of them were about my size, so that helped until I got caught by my older sister. And she thoroughly embarrassed me in front of her friends and told my mom, and so my mom knew.
I remember just a lot of conversations with my mom where, I guess, looking back now, I can see that's totally what, I was trying to make sense of it and trying to figure out what was going on.
I don't remember the exact moment, but I took a long time to get right in my mind before I changed my body. So I guess I formally came out probably around 2007. I went to see one particular therapist. I needed a really long time talking with someone who understood trans issues. Because I kept going back and forth. Am I really gender non-conforming? Or really a trans man? So I just play with gender? Or is this really my gender?
My mom, she didn't approve, but she didn't disapprove. She was neutral about it. She told me that I shouldn't do it, that it was wrong. But she, I didn't get a spanking for it or anything like that. So I had confused feelings about that too. Is this right or is it wrong?
So flash forward through high school, I'm like, it's a long, complicated story. Just lots and lots of years of just repression and repression. I was super depressed. I was self-harming, using drugs. I used drugs for about 3 years in high school. I've been clean now for 4 years now, thankfully, but this was after I graduated high school.
Somewhere around 7th grade, I got involved with drugs like everybody else. Smoking weed, trying to be cool, trying to fit in. By high school, I was a major pill pusher.
When I was maybe 10 or 11 years old, I just came to the point, well, I kind of sublimated, like a lot of trans people do in terms of, I just sort of accepted that I would never actually be who I was. So my identity at that time would have been some sort of compromised position as a gay male.
I feel as I grew up, society kind of pushed on me. Oh, you're a tomboy. You're a girl. You're a tomboy. That's it. You're going through a phase. So I was like, oh, all right, that must be it. I'm going through a phase because that's what they had told me. So I just kept going with it. And then I got into high school and I was like, all right, I'm gay. That's it. I'm gay. And then it turned out that that's not what it was.
After high school, I ended up moving in with my girlfriend at the time, and her roommate was a trans guy, and I had no idea you could actually do that.
There were a couple of other kids at high school who were transgender, and I spoke to them, and I just remember it was kind of a sense of relief. It was a big sense of relief because there are people just like me.
When I first met him, I just thought he was just this cute little gay guy because he had this awesome beard, and he's like, no, I'm straight. And I'm like, you're straight? No way! And then he ended up coming out to me like, yeah, I'm trans. I've been on T for 2 years. And I'm like, no way! I'm just sitting there in disbelief.
So it took a lot of soul searching and just trying to say, okay, am I really a man? I was like, no one sees me as a man, and I wasn't socialized as a man. Maybe I'm not really a man. There's a lot of self-doubt.
So I quit high school. I went into the service. I kind of figured this will straighten me out, but I didn't do too well there either. I got out. I got a job, and always had girlfriends. Had a couple bar sexual experiences, gay experiences, whatever. But I didn't like it other than the fact of getting off, the ejaculating part. Spent a couple of years, got married. Had 2 daughters and a son. And through that whole time, I was getting extremely high all the time. I never felt anything. I didn't feel love. The only thing I felt was a sense of rage and hate. And I didn't realize until years later that hate was towards myself.
I knew from an early age that I was going to join the military. My family's poor and still is, so I knew I was going to join the military out of high school. I did 21 years in the Navy, but knowing trans people are automatically forbidden from the military, I hid that the entire time I was in the Navy.
Wow.
Yeah, cross-dressing aboard a ship was not going to happen.
Being a gay male was an identity I never quite internalized. It always felt like a facade or something foreign to me, as foreign as it would have felt to be a hyper-masculine heterosexual male.
A year goes by, and I'm like, my head's going crazy after meeting this guy. My head's going nuts. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to think. And I'm just sitting there like, no, I'm a lesbian, I'm not transgender because everything that I've been taught has been so negative. No, you can't do this. You're a girl. You're a lesbian. And as time goes by, I get these creeping feelings that no, I'm not a lesbian. I'm not a lesbian. What am I? What am I?
I went from a little kid who knew what they were feeling for the most part. I'm not quite sure, but the feelings were there. I just wasn't sure how to word it. I wasn't sure what to do with it. What I realized was that sometimes your body and your brain don't match up, but that's okay.
I guess for me, I knew just mostly in terms of physical things about my body that were up. And that's very common for trans people. They don't feel that their physical their physical self matches the gender that's in their brain. And it's still very true for me, you know? I didn't like my breasts. I definitely don't like down there. But I think that taking hormones and transitioning has made me feel better about those parts of my body.
Uh-huh.
So I saw this ad in the New York Times in the late 80s, early 90s, where Pan Am were hiring international flight attendants. International flight attendants based out of London, flying all over the world. You had to speak a foreign language, and I grew up speaking Italian with my family, and then I studied German at NYU. So I applied, and I got the job as a flight attendant. And I think it was one of those compromise steps. This was my way of acting out. This bohemian gay male intellectual becoming a flight attendant was like a bridge type way to live. I mean, it was sort of like being able to act out parts of me that felt feminine without actually transitioning. It would have been extremely difficult at the time.
So, what is the process? What's going on in your head? How do you get there? That you are, in fact, trans?
I was in my junior year. I kind of started saying, all right, I'm identifying as male. I'm going by Cameron. This is who I am. Respect it. So then I started having some issues with mental health because I was trying to get onto testosterone. Finally, I found a therapist that I liked and that understood me. She saw me as a person who was identifying as male, and that's all I really could ask for. You know, treating me like a human being.
Right.
So in my junior year of high school, that's when I was really going for the hormones and whatnot. That was a really, really rough time. From January into about March, I started really struggling.
I started transitioning slowly, 2009. This was after 5 or 6 years of therapy where I did nothing. No physical transition, not even uttering the word to anybody else except myself and other like-minded people like myself. I started taking some testosterone, just little bits, not like the full shot, just to get like a little bit. And I started to transition slowly. Then in 2011 in March, I actually came out at work. And everyone was super accepting because I feared that if I transitioned, I would lose my job and all of these horrible things would happen. And some of these things do happen to trans people.
In 1989, I met my now ex-wife. And after about 3 weeks of going out, because that was the longest I'd actually dated a woman, I thought this might actually go somewhere. So, instead of, just one night stands or whatever. So I decided to be courteous and respectful and to tell her that, I cross-dressed and that someday I might want to be more than just a cross-dresser. Well, she was in the psychology department getting a higher degree in psychology, and I was getting my degree in military training. And she thought she could change me, and I thought she had accepted me.
By 25 years old, I was looking at attempted murder charges, breaking an entry, theft, and the attempted murder was on a police officer. I attacked him in somebody's house while overdosing with a hatchet. Good thing I was in my own hometown. They knew who I was, and shit happens. Well, they forced me into the program, and I went to a couple rehabs while waiting for court, and I'm 25 at this point. I met somebody in rehab who was 11 years my junior, which would get me locked up today, but not back then, and fell in love with him. And for the first time, I could actually say I loved someone without having a condition.
So I spent the next 25 years of my life flying all over the world, living as a gay male. I had a series of serious boyfriends. And I developed this relationship with Patrick, who became a best friend and a confidant, but increasingly less of a physical partner. So Patrick and I lived together for probably about 12 years. And as I got older, as I got into my 30s, particularly my mid to late 30s, I was finding it increasingly difficult to live my life. I was getting depressed more and more often. I was feeling like nothing about my life matched who I thought I was. And I started to remember things that happened in my childhood that I'd either sublimated or just plain forgot.
My head's going nuts. It's like a year has gone by, and my head is going crazy after meeting my girlfriend's roommate. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to think. And I'm just sitting there like, no, I'm a lesbian, you know? I'm not transgender. And at the time, I was so like almost disgusted by the thought that I was transgender, you know? Because everything that I've been taught has been so negative and been so like, no, you can't do this. You're a girl. You're a lesbian. And as time goes by, I get these like creeping feelings that like, no, I'm not a lesbian. I'm not a lesbian. Like, what am I? What am I? And when I looked in the mirror, I hated myself.
The time between January and March was really hard for me. I was very depressed, very anxious. I was on medications, but they weren't really working. Why isn't it doing this? And I was still trying to go for testosterone, and I don't know, there was a lot going on. It was all going on at once. It was, my parents were getting a divorce. I was, that's on top of the regular high school crap, and I was moving, So, like, oh, by the way, there's this transition thing that you're probably gonna have to deal with at some point. And I started feeling really, really hopeless. I remember I didn't want to live anymore at all. I was, if this is how I'm gonna live, I don't want to live.
Somehow, I got sober. And I had spent 4 years with this person that I fell in love with, and for whatever reasons, we broke up. Still never really quite talked about that. I was in Florida going for a motorcycle technician, and I was one of the top students in my class, which kind of amazes me, and proceeded to become 100% biker, thinking that this is going to prove my manhood again. And I spent the next 20 years getting high. And through the years, I dressed on and off with different people, but never felt anything, because, well, it was messed by drugs and like, let's get high and stick ungodly things in our bodies and do other things we shouldn't be doing to ourselves. It's different, Kind of really weird, the life of a junkie.
There was one night, I was very suicidal. I had a plan, really. I was pretty sure. I was alright. This is it. I don't want to do this. I'm done. And I just remember I was sitting next to my cat, and it was crazy, but I feel like my cat saved my life that day. It's weird, I know. But she's my best friend, and animals, they get it. And I remember I went downstairs and I was crying, and I asked my mom was asking, what's wrong? And I was panicking, and I was just hysterical. And it's hard to transition. It's hard to live that life. And I just didn't want to be alive. So she and my brother brought me to Hasbro Hospital, and they checked me in.
When I looked in that mirror and I hated myself, that was dysphoria. I had no idea, because I was never taught that it's okay to feel like this and it's normal to be trans. I was living with my girlfriend and her roommate, and I would see him like doing his injections, and I'm seeing him planning his top surgery, and I'm just like, get this feeling like, why do I want this so bad? I want to be just like him.
This is very common with a lot of trans people, you know. They feel that their physical self doesn't match the gender that's in their brain. In my, I always say my mental transition is done and ongoing. I took a really long time to get right in my mind before I changed my body.
I started to remember little things, rewinding back to that time when I was 5, 6, 7 years old. My mother had this pink terry cloth jumpsuit with a big zipper up the front. It was the most outrageous and feminine piece of attire you could imagine, and I fetishized it. I developed this. Well, it was the focus of my world when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, and I stole it. I took it to my room, and I would just try it on and wear it, and it wasn't sexual or proto-sexual, but it was just the most fulfilling, happy thing I could do. And I remember lip syncing to Brandy, you're a fine girl, fine girl. Wearing that pink terry cloth jumpsuit. My mom would find it in my room. And we had this unspoken kind of tug of war where she would take it and hide it back in her own closet. And then I would find it again and take it up to my room.
As I mentioned, my wife thought that she could change me, and I thought that she had accepted my cross-dressing. So my wife and I, we had children. We had 3 of them, and that complicated things, obviously. So we both stayed together. I mean, we had a very good relationship, a little volatile at times, and the more I was in the Navy, the longer I got mad at people. So I had a lot of anger issues.
Right, I understand.
But, you know, through therapy, I figured out that I wasn't really mad at everybody around me. I was mad at myself for not having the guts to do what I should have done in the first place. So all that misery, that was one of our big reasons me and my ex divorced.
I am 54 years old today, you know? I made it. Everyone was betting I wouldn't make 25. Don't blame them, I would have taken that bet too. You know? It's me, just prior to basic training. There's my son. You know, when he was told I started transitioning, he stopped talking to me. There's my sister. She just started talking to me again. That's me as a dirtbag biker.
Oh, wow.
Big difference, huh?
Yeah.
My wife died in my arms of an overdose. So, got my letters and affairs as straight as I could. I went to a hotel room. Started drinking. Stuck a gun in my mouth and pulled the trigger. And it didn't go off. Didn't understand why. Still don't today. I mean, I still have the shell, the cap, and the back on the primer. Know the gun worked because a friend of mine is still using it. I don't know what happened. So since that didn't work, I proceeded to shoot 10 bags of heroin, a dirty tube colonic, and drunk a 5th of whiskey. Those 2 combinations could have killed a 450-pound horse. Well, it didn't kill me.
But when I retired from the Navy, I decided that I wanted to change the rules. Me and my wife were separated in 2009, and my children came to spend every other weekend with me. So the other weekends were Tiffany's weekends. And at first, I would just dress in the house, and I contacted a lady from Avon to buy makeup, and I would buy all my clothes online. I mean, what else could I do? Well, the Avon lady lived downstairs from me in the apartment complex. The odds of living right next to each other. But I struck gold. We became really good friends. Because of my anger and everything, my ex-wife got a court order so that I couldn't see my 3 children. And I just didn't have the money to fight her. So I lost my visitation right. I mean, they could come and visit me if they wanted, but of course she didn't tell the kids, you know? So I couldn't go over and just pick them up, what I still regret today.
Once I came out in 2011, I kind of just kept going. Nothing could stop me after that. I changed my name legally, so from Rachel to Ari. So that's mostly my progression in time in terms of transition. I kind of struggled a lot up front. And then I hit a breaking point and I said, I can either be the person everyone expects me to be, or I can just say, who cares about what those people think? Once you kind of just say, you know, these people don't identify me, I do, then that, I think, that's really the turning point for me. Once I took the power away from people saying, this is what you are, it all came together for me. But that just took a long time.
Are there any other issues that you can think of that you had to deal with in terms of this process? It's kind of broad, but...
I was born intersex, and I have a high level of testosterone, so it's like that was almost a cue. And so my mom, it took her a while, but she's one of the most supportive people, and she has pretty much funded my transition, and she has helped me get onto my feet. And if my mom had known, she has told me this numerous times, if she had known what transgender was from when I was a young age, I would have transitioned earlier. She would have let me, because in the media, we're looked down upon and we're seen as less than people because we're trans. One of my friends actually committed suicide pretty recently, and it's just like suicide rates among trans people is like 41%, which is 25 times higher than the national average. We're hated for being who we are.
In the hospital at Hasbro, being in the hospital, it helped me because it kind of made me sit back and realize, okay, if I wasn't here, I would be dead right now, and I wouldn't be going forward in that sense. But I remember I was kind of thinking, there's so many people that are transgender. I think it's 49% that attempt suicide. And out of all those people who go through with it, that are successful with it, their stories are just gone. Their stories are silenced. And that's when I decided I had to survive. I had to keep going. I had to transition. I'm not gonna be another name. I'm gonna be a face to that name, and I am gonna make my story be heard.
Friend came to the hotel room the next day, picked me up, put me in her car, and drove me to a hospital for crisis unit. Next 2 months I spent in a mental institution. I didn't say a word. I couldn't talk. I couldn't do anything.
After I came out, I was 19. I turned 20, started therapy, then started hormones. I'm 22 now, and I've been on hormones for 2 years and 4 months. And I've never been happier. I mean, I can look at myself in the mirror and I see who I really am. I can see this guy smiling at me.
When I was in my late 30s, my mom got very sick. She had a form of leukemia that was killing her very quickly. Between the time that she was diagnosed and the time that she actually died was maybe a couple of months, so I took some time off from my flight attendant job. At the time I was flying for Delta, Pan Am had gone out of business. So I took some time off to help care for her, and 2 months later she was dead. So as soon as we had the funeral, my world pretty much began falling apart in terms of being able to function as the person I'd been. And I think a lot of the ways I developed my whole life to not express my essentially female being, not to express my transgender identity, fell apart. Because I think they'd been instilled a lot by my mom. My mother thought she was doing her best, as happens with just about every trans youth even now, but she was doing her best to teach me all these little tricks of self-repression to behave in a way that I might be able to live in society.
Like I said, once I took the power away from other people saying, this is what you are, it all came together for me. Some people, they're worried about losing their friends and family. I was just trying to make sure I was right in my mind before I did all those physical changes to my body that are not really reversible.
I constantly deal with transphobia, and my partner is non-binary. It's almost unnecessary, the amount of ignorance that we both face. So they're agender and go by they pronouns.
Could you please explain, for the sake of the record, what non-binary, what you're referring to?
Sure, absolutely. There's this thing that society has put in place, and it's seen everywhere. It's called the gender binary. So there's male and female, and that's what people see, and that's what they think there is. So that's called the binary.
Before the court order, my kids would come over on my weekends, and the kids, they saw clothes in my closet, but they never said anything. They just assumed it was one of my girlfriends, which I didn't have any girlfriends, but I wasn't, and, they didn't ask, so, but they were younger at the time. So I was dressing up every weekend that I could, and over time, I dressed and went out during the day, and that was scary. I mean, all these little things are very scary. And finally, I found a club called the Dark Lady up here.
In Providence.
Yeah, right. So I got brave, and I went there for a Halloween party, and I was very scared, very scared. But I found that, there are a lot of nice people, I mean, I had never been to a gay bar. Well, I don't like calling it a gay bar. It's a place for LGBT people to hang out.
Right.
So I had a really good time. And I noticed that nobody in there was angry. Nobody wanted to fight someone else. It wasn't like a regular bar I had been to. Everybody was happy. I'm like, this is what happy is about. This is it. This is where I wanted to be all my life. Because you never grow up and say, oh, I want to be angry. I just want to be a son of a bitch. Oh, can I say that?
Of course you can say that.
I'm technically a binary trans man, so I go by he pronouns. He, his. They're considered male pronouns. So non-binary people, they feel neither male or female. So my partner, they're agender. Gender is a spectrum, and there's tons of different people, and there's all walks of life,
And so your partner prefers what for neutral pronoun?
They go by them, they, their.
So, okay, they're using the plural.
Yeah, gender neutral.
Right. Thank you for explaining that. I knew what you meant, but I wanted it for the record, from your perspective.
Totally. My mom's side has been great, because my mom, corrects everybody and speaks up for me. My mom is super proud of me. She, tells everyone that she has a transgender son and is so proud, yeah, this is my kid. My dad has been accepting, but it's been a little bit harder for him, because I was daddy's little girl. I was the youngest. I was always helping him work outside. I was a tomboy.
I have two sisters, and they're fine with it. They're like, whatever you want. And they don't really care. It's a little bit harder for my mom. She still calls me the wrong name and even looking like this. So I find it funny because her using the wrong name and wrong pronouns, I'm like, that just makes you look crazy, not me. Grandparents, I think they just avoid it altogether. They just avoid they'll use the name, they'll avoid the pronouns.
Because I had a host of mental issues, I was able to receive my Social Security disability. Plus, I had 3 degenerating bulging discs in my lower back and 3 in my neck. I had hit a deer on a motorcycle a bunch of years back. So, a friend of mine says, why don't you come over to Rhode Island? I was in Pennsylvania at the time, after Florida. So I said, yeah, you have a great weed connection. So I moved.
So like I said, I had to survive. I had to keep going. I had to transition. I remember at that point in the hospital, they finally diagnosed me with, I think it was called GID at that point. I think it's called gender identity disorder. So from there, it was definitely a little bit easier to get hormones. My mom was like, all right. And then it was just a matter of convincing my dad, who I wasn't living with. I wasn't a big fan of him. He knew he had screwed up with me, with my mom. So I was kind of like, this is who I am, this is what I want, this is what I'm going to do, and you need to respect that. And he was kind of like, oh, okay.
As I said, with my mother's death, my world pretty much fell apart. I flew back home after the funeral to Seattle, where I was living with Patrick, and that week made an appointment to start hormones and transition. Having never donned an article of clothing, female clothing, in my adult life since that hot pink hot pants jumpsuit, I felt immediately better the first week I was on hormones. Calmer, happier, completely more at peace with myself just by the act of taking the hormones.
So in Rhode Island, I started dressing more regular. I would drive down the street to the Veterans Cemetery, I would change, and I'd hang out all day long as a girl. I'd go home and go back as a boy. I was allowing myself to feel things that I never did, but by still getting high, it inhibited it. I made okay money on disability, but I needed more, you know? I needed a way to finance Joe to Josie. So, I went back to selling drugs. I was good at selling drugs, and in due time, I became the #2 drug dealer in the state of Rhode Island, and probably even in the surrounding area of Massachusetts.
I'll never forget the day that I went in for my first shot. I went in and it was unreal. I was just like, all right, I know I'm not gonna feel anything immediately, but this is the point where my life starts. This is where I'm beginning. It's weird because most people begin when they're born, but for me, it was later on. So I started hormones that year, my junior year of high school, and everything was going really well. The changes were just happening naturally. It was kind of like a second puberty. I never wanted the first one, so a second puberty is a second and last one, thank God. But it was just very natural. And it was like, people would look and say, oh, that's just a teenage boy going through puberty. He must be a late bloomer. And I was just like, it was really cool to start to be able to really fit in, and I wasn't pretending. I wasn't putting forth this fake face anymore. I wasn't wearing a mask. I was fitting in as who I really was.
I was going to the Dark Lady a lot. Well, actually, I'm not even gonna lie to you. I was just looking to get hooked up with a man and find out what sex was like with a man. I mean, it was totally experimental because I needed to know. Is this okay to talk about?
Whatever you want to talk about is fine.
All right. So, I had a few experiences and I wasn't sure. I mean, I still wasn't for sure if I liked being with men or not. So, I was talking with a friend of mine at Christmas. My kids, you know, they were with their mom at Christmas and New Year's, and it got really lonely. So I was home, you know, talking with this friend of mine. You know, I just want to wish you a Merry Christmas. And I asked him, just out of the blue, what he was doing for New Year's. And he's like, nothing. And I'm like, well, would you want to go to a club with me? And he's like, one of your clubs? And I'm like, yeah, one of my clubs. And he's like, but there's no straight women there. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you'd be surprised. Straight women go there because the men don't hit on them. The men are interested in the same thing as the women are. So he goes, all right, I'll go with you. So we went, and for New Year's Eve of 13 into 14, I was drinking very heavily that night. I don't drink a lot, but I was drinking very heavily that night. And he said something to me. He's like, you know, I love hanging out with Tiffany every day of the week, but Tom's an asshole. And I'm like, I've known you for like 28 years at this point, and this is the first time I've ever heard anyone call me an asshole, like, in regular. And he's like, no, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to Tiffany. And I'm like, you know I'm the same person. And he's like, no, you're not.
I'm always convinced that if someone likes you from the start as a person and you change, they're still gonna like you. And I found that to be true. They may think it's strange and they're not gonna understand it, but they don't treat me any differently. Let me give you an example. I used to be a civil engineer. I don't do design work anymore. I work on the wastewater field. And it's sort of like old, like white, like 90% of the population, people I work with, I mean, the generation of the people in this business, they tend to take care of their own. It's, unfortunately, it's how it works to a good old boy system, you know? I mean, I don't know, but they're all like Republican-looking rednecks, which is funny because they love me. And they know what I am, so like, it's crazy.
My grandmother on my dad's side, I didn't come out to her. The family told her, and the next time I saw her, she didn't slip one bit, and she used the right pronouns, correct name, and like took me aside and told me how much she loves me. Then she told me she had a transgender sister who was assigned at birth, a male at birth, and transitioned to female in the 1970s. She passed away in the early 2000s, but my grandmother took me aside and said, you know, I saw how much my sister struggled with this, and I saw how much it hurt her, and I'm never not going to accept you.
So the people I thought were gonna be like my hugest cheerleaders were kind of like, all right, that's a little weird, but whatever. Then the ones I thought were completely gonna just like nothing to do with me were like, that's fine, who cares? Get back to work. It's amazing. If I were a trans woman, on the other hand, I don't know how well that would have went off. But I do have some trans women folks that I work with in the company, and they seem okay. But I think it would be a little bit more of an uphill battle if I were on the other side.
Right.
Because we live in a misogynistic and patriarchal society, so, you know, you're trading down instead of trading up, which is ridiculous anyways. So that's my experience.
So after the, we were eating our breakfast on New Year's Day, at Denny's, and I was sitting there with a huge hangover, of course, and I'm like, I'm gonna do it. And my friend totally forgot what he said, but I remembered, because it bore right into, my own persona of who I am, who I thought I was. And I was like, I'm gonna transition. And he's like, wow, you go out one night, you get drunk, and the next morning at Denny's you decide this? And I'm like, no, you're the one that made me decide. And he's like, what did I do? So I had to explain and tell him that he had said that. And he's like, well, I'm sorry. So effectively January 1st of 14 was when I made the decision. I was 45 at the time, and 45 years of Tom, and there's not going to be 45 years of Tiffany. I don't think I'll live that long. But I need to grab hold of what I have left and make the rest of my life right.
I had met a friend who just started basically transitioning a little before me, which had been about a year. And they had just started hormones when we met. Because I didn't understand the whole process of transitioning, it really didn't matter because I felt okay in my own skin dressing every day and being as feminine as I could, that was almost okay with, well, for me it really was, but then when I started understanding that there's medications, surgeries, and other things that can help me feel more like who I really am, I started looking into it.
So about 2 years after the hormones, I scheduled, well, my mom had left me some money when she died, so I had the money and the time and the freedom to do it, so I scheduled what they call facial feminization surgery. It's a way of, well, it's extensive bone surgery on your face that sort of reconstructs your facial bone structure specifically for trans women that want to look more feminine. My hairline was cut and lowered about 1.5 inches. My jaw was completely reshaped. About half the muscle mass are removed from your jaws, and the bones reshaped so you have a more feminine shape to your face. And my chin was completely reconstructed because there are very prominent differences between a typical male and a female chin. And I, of course, got a nose job, which is the theme of any Italian girl. And I walked out of that surgery. It was an 18-hour operation. So when you come out of a surgery like that, facial surgery that extensive, you look like you're on the verge of death. You look like you've been in the worst possible imaginable accident or train wreck, and it's extremely painful. More pain than I can ever remember or even imagine, but I was happier than I've ever been in my life.
I don't like doctors. And I don't like having to pay doctor bills. Because of Medicare, I still have to pay 20%, and I'm not going to pay a doctor. I'd rather spend that on another dress or a set of heels. You know, if I had Imelda Marcos's money, I'd have twice as many shoes as she ever had. I definitely have that shoe fetish. 2012. I started hormone replaced therapy. I have actual breasts today. And that makes me happy. I can walk out of the house without 22 pounds of makeup on, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with my somewhat manly tattoos. Some are really, I don't know how I got here. But I know that I am comfortable in my skin today.
The first second I looked in that mirror, that swollen, bloody mess, it was a swollen, bloody woman looking back at me, and I'd never been happier. It's difficult to describe to anyone who isn't trans the kind of disconnect that happens when you look in the mirror and see a stranger looking back at you. You look in the mirror and it's surreal. It's maddening to just see someone looking back at you who's not who you really are. And so for the first time in my life, that didn't happen.
Can I tell you a bad story if you want to hear it?
Sure.
I was living in Manchester, New Hampshire at the time. It's not a very good city. There's a high crime rate, but I love it. Anyways, this was right when it came out, and I was living there, and I had just got off of work, and I really had to pee. So I went to a McDonald's, and I went into the men's room, like trans people, when they go into the bathroom, they just have to go to the bathroom. I don't know why people are like, oh, well, you're gonna peep on us. It's like, no, I just have to pee. Like, what do you do in the bathroom? Like,
So that was the start of my social transition. Well, there is a standard of care for transgender people. It was originally developed in the 50s and 60s, which was a response to Christine Jorgensen's very public transition. It's now called the World Premier Association of Transgender Health or something like that. But for me at the time, the standard of care required a schedule of gender reassignment surgery, so it's now gender confirmation surgery. And I was scheduled for a year away, and I was required to live in my projected gender. So I was living as a female 24/7, a female with a penis. I went back to work after the facial surgery as an international flight attendant, flying regularly in and out of the Middle East.
So I go in there, and there were these kids that are like 17 to 20 in the age group, and they kind of give me a look, and I'm like, whatever. I just go into the bathroom and just do my thing. I come out, and I start to wash my hands, and like one of the, like, I think it was kind of like the ringleader goes like, are you a boy or a girl? And I was like, well, I'm in the boys' room, so clearly I'm a boy. And he like screams in my face that I'm an it, and he pushes me to the ground, and someone had knelt down behind me, and he tabletoped me to the ground. They started kicking me all around, like in my stomach, in my chest, my leg, in my back. Like one of them kicked me in the face, and like the ringleader guy started pulling down my pants and was like, check what gender it is, check what gender it is. And so they started pulling down my pants, and I screamed, no. And I ended up kicking him in the face and breaking his nose. And he like stopped and like, let's go, let's go. He was almost crying, and his nose was wicked bleeding. They all run out, and they just left me on the ground like crying and holding my face and pulling up my pants. And I had never felt weaker in my entire life. I never felt worse in my entire life because I had to pee. And I just wanted to wash my hands and like leave.
I had had my passport and my airline ID changed to female already, but I was flying into countries where I could have been imprisoned or worse if they had discovered that I had a penis. Iraq, Afghanistan, Kurdistan, and I remember a really tricky time in Dubai. I got pulled aside in customs when I was going through, and I was with all the other flight attendants with my uniform and my badge on and my passport that said female on it. And something about me, probably a lot about me, tipped off the customs guy that I wasn't like the other women. And they pulled me aside to a little room and called over a couple of police officers, and they were having this intense conversation in Arabic in front of me, and they would look at me and point and laugh, and they kept coming over to me with my passport and saying, this is not you, is it? This isn't you. And I said, of course it's me. It's, I'm part of this airline crew. So I was pretty sure that if they pursued it, and if they detained me and figured out that I had breasts and a penis, that something pretty bad would happen to me.
I had never felt weaker in my entire life. I never felt worse in my entire life because I had to pee, and I just wanted to wash my hands and just leave. Just gotten off a long day at work, and they all just couldn't see me as anything but an it. And this was before I started hormones and everything, so I still had a female voice and female, just look. It was the scariest thing in my life.
So the head flight attendant, who was this kind of strong friend of mine, I remember her banging on the door where they were detaining me and just saying, let her out! She's part of our crew! So anyway, they finally let me out with lots of laughs and derision and scoffing, and they let me go. And when I got back home, I called my doctor who was going to perform my gender reassignment surgery, and I was still about 7 months away. I called him and my psychiatrist, and I just said, I think it's universally acknowledged that I'm going to go through with this transition. It's physically and legally dangerous for me to keep flying. I have to work. I have to keep this job. I want to keep this job. But I'm flying around the world in places where it's extremely perilous to do so as a female with a penis. And so they moved up my surgery by 6 months. And between the time I had my facial surgery and the time I had my complete gender reassignment surgery and breast augmentation, it was probably about 5 months altogether between the two. And I was physically female. Not that I ever wasn't female, but my anatomy confirmed my feelings about myself.
Is there anything else that you would like to share?
I am starting to love me for who I am today. I'm a strong, proud woman. There's still a lot about me that I have to find out, but I'm willing to find out. I'm 5.5 months sober now. I'm practicing my Buddhism to the best of my ability today, and know that at some point it will get better, because I'm doing my best. I'm not trying to, I'm doing. I'm no longer trying. I can hold my head up and walk out the door without all that makeup on, just like any other woman that can at my age. I have nothing to prove. I know who I am.
I had my top surgery about 5 months ago, and for me now, I'm thinking I am glad I had it. I am glad it's done. I can't even tell you. Yesterday, I drove around without a shirt on because it was really hot, and it was exhilarating. I felt like one of those assholes who does it all the time. I hate those guys. I was one of those guys. It was amazing.
We have this little group on Fridays. We barbecue. And I found out that my friend Mike, the one that I took out for New Year's Eve, had told everyone in the barbecue group except Bill. So Bill's the only one in the whole group that doesn't know, so nobody can say anything to me. And I didn't even know they knew. So I was like, Mike, really? I mean, that's kind of like for me to tell people. So I was like, okay, Bill, look, I've got to tell you something. And it took me like a couple of hours to tell him. And he's like, you're kidding me. He's like, this is going to be so cool. He's like, we're a military installation. And he's like, you're going to knock their socks off. This is awesome.
As I said, my story is just mine. It's actually a little bit unusual. It's not representational of every trans person. I tell them, I know I'm lucky. So that's my experience.
I have a trans pride sticker on my monitor at my desk, and I can't tell you the number of students who I have spoken with who look at it and get this odd look in their eye. I think the young LGBT people should be able to see someone who's 30, 40 years older than them, who has a life and a job and a responsibility, and who seems healthy and reasonably happy and reasonably sane.
I also have a funny story. I have a nephew, and from when he was like 2.5, I used to babysit him all the time, and he knew me as my old name. And one day we were outside riding bikes, and he looks at me and he's like, I wish you were a boy. And I was like, why? And he was like, so we could be buddies. And I hadn't come out to anybody yet. He did that probably the day after I actually came out to myself. And I was like, guess what? I am a boy. And from then on, he started using male pronouns. And he was the first one I came out to. He sticks up for me. And he corrects everybody who uses my old name. He corrects everybody. When we're out in public, people will call me his daddy. I mean, he doesn't even correct them anymore. He doesn't. He actually told me the other day, he was like, you're the closest thing that I have to a dad. And that immediately, of course, made me like a gross snot bobble sobbing. He told me, and I was like, I'm always gonna be around. I'm always gonna be there for you. And he's like, thank you, Eli. I love you. I love you. I'm like, I love you, Cleveland. There's nothing more validating than that.
Thank you. I really appreciate all that you've shared. I know that when we're able to put on the production, that sharing your story will help others to be able to share theirs. So thank you.